كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده. أما بعد، سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, we send salutations upon our beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us, to bless our families, to grant us the best of this life and the hereafter, to grant us His pleasure, and to grant us beneficial knowledge. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. So today we will finish off one more question remaining from the zakat section regarding zakat on pensions. So I will explain regarding that detail. Then we will go on to the rest of the discussions in the book that's left in this the title left is the charity at the end of the Ramadan. So the Sadaqatul Fitr, this discussion is left in the book, so we will finish off this discussion going through meaning firstly the ruling of Sadaqatul Fitr. Is it wajib? Is it sunnah? What's the ruling for it? And who do you pay on behalf of? How much do you pay? We'll cover some modern rulings there in terms of conversions. How much do you pay? Then we will also talk about when exactly does the wujub, the mandate, actually come in of Sadaqatul Fitr. What's the time of it being mandatory? What is also, when do you give it? Okay, when do you give the Sadaqatul Fitr? We'll talk about that inshallah. And then I'll also mention a ruling, hopefully, which is not covered here in the book. So regarding what value do you consider when giving Sadaqatul Fitr? Is it the local rate where you are? So your local rate. If you're giving your Sadaqatul Fitr abroad, do you consider your local rate, or do you consider the recipient's local rate? So these are the few rulings that we'll cover inshallah today. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So now we will be doing a detailed discussion regarding zakat on pensions. So firstly, understand that generally the pension schemes are of two types. So far, to our understanding, these other schemes that you have will fall generally are under one of these two umbrella bodies of pension types, you can say. So one is a defined benefit pension, and the other is a defined contribution pension. So the DB or the DC, defined benefit or defined contribution. So as the name suggests, defined benefit would be a benefit that's given to an employee upon receiving retirement, upon retirement age. So it's money that the employer will give at the retirement age, and in essence this is like a deferred salary, as we would term it, deferred salary, whereby the company that you've been working for would invest in on behalf of the employer as such, because they haven't paid the employee a certain amount of money that the employee in essence worked for. So what they do, they invest this money rather than paying the employee on their own behalf. It's invested on behalf of the employer. So therefore, the employee in essence has not been given that payment. And eventually at the end of it, there's sums to work it out. There's complicated sums that work this out, but the employee, upon reaching a certain age, would be given this benefit. Sometimes companies give a lump sum, and then they subsequently give monthly payments. Otherwise, they give different options at that time as well. But this defined benefit, we don't take too long on it, because it's not a scheme that is offered by many companies. There's not a common one. It's offered by certain governmental companies or certain companies that really do look after their employees quite well. So they offer this defined benefit, which is very lucrative for the employee. And the main point of this is that this defined benefit will not be zakatable, because it's like a deferred salary. The employee never received this money for it to be then invested on behalf of the employee. So then it never came into the possession of the employee. It's like I explained, deferred salaries in essence, which is then not zakatable. So that's the defined benefit scheme. When we come to a defined contribution, which majority of the schemes will fall under, so firstly we want to determine the defined contribution in essence is something which the employee is contributing into, whether it's deducted directly from the salary, but it's something in essence something that the employee was able to opt in and out of, was able to opt in or opt out of. This is the defined contribution, and they are in essence a separate company. Generally it would be a separate company that the employer or maybe the employee will select, and that company will have the pension being invested into various different investments on behalf of the employee. The pension will be held in the name of an employee. Yearly they will receive a balance as well of their current pension, and there may even be an option where they can apply after a certain number of years for a payout, though it will be they may be fined, or there may be certain fees involved and everything else. But this is something which is the defined contribution in essence. So first thing that needs to be determined is whether the defined contribution is being invested into halal investments. So that's something that needs to be firstly understood. As long as it's being invested into Sharia compliant investments, then the defined contribution is halal, or at least proportionately to the amount of investment which is Sharia compliant would be halal, and that would then be zakatable. But the proportion that would be zakatable is that you identify from your balance sheet, you try to identify the amount of zakatable assets in that pension fund. So you see where the pension is being invested. So if it's in equities, or is it in precious metals? Is it in alternatives? Is it cash and is it cash or cash equivalents? Is it currencies? Is it commodities? Is it hedge funds? Is it property and real estate? What is it being invested in? So you see the balance sheet and you try to work out where this company is investing the pension, and then you try to work out, okay, which parts are zakatable. If it's obviously if they are if it's unlawful bonds, interest income, and such type of investments which are obviously unlawful, then if obviously a person is not going to keep that money and dispose of that money in proportion to that, then we can understand that that would not be zakatable. And if it's, for example, equities, then you can go by a overarching 40% of that being zakatable, because 40% of that generally, if it's equities, would be something 40% is a safe figure. I mean, if you can work out how much exactly of those equities are zakatable, then yeah, I mean, you go for that. But you can find online a lot of help on this. How much of equities are zakatable in terms of percentage? How much of, if it's commodities, if it's property in real estate, is it zakatable or not? So if it's a property which is owned for rent, then it's not zakatable. But if it's properties that are for resale, then it will be zakatable. You have to identify all of these things. So the main thing is to understand is that the zakatable assets of this Sharia compliant defined contribution needs to be identified, and then according to that, zakat should be given. Now, the ideal thing is to keep including it every year into your zakatable amount, so that eventually every year by year, you've paid it. Otherwise, what will happen is some people, they say, obviously you can defer that. If you can't afford to pay it, you can defer it until you actually receive the pension. So it could be at that time when you do receive the pension that when you calculate all the years, that it adds up to quite a lot, because there's going to be considerable age when the person does receive that money back. And when you do receive that money as a pension, even if it's a lump sum, you may end up spending the whole lump sum that you've gained in paying all those years of zakat. To work out the zakat of all those years might even get tricky and difficult. So it's advisable to keep giving the zakat yearly, and it might get a bit difficult. Then if it gets difficult, then you ask somebody for help. Go to somebody when it's really complicated, then you can go and ask a specialist, or you can ask hopefully people that know regarding finances and zakat. Hopefully I've given you an overarching concept of it anyway. So this is in regards to one last thing regarding pensions. If it's pensions that are state mandatory pensions, such as the national insurance contributions, or any such contributions that a country takes directly from the salary, from the wage of the actual employee, and the employee has no choice but to give this, then this is in essence like taxes, you can say, which are not zakatable because it's taken directly from the wage. So it never came into your possession. You never ever got the chance to take that into possession. It was directly deducted. So there's no zakat on these type of contributions, these type of, even if it's a pension that you're contributing into, because it's state mandatory pension, which is directly being taken from your wage. You have no choice, and you have no opt-out option as well. So I'm sure this all is understood now, and it brings us to a close regarding these pensions. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. So now we go on to our final topic from the book now, charity at the end of Ramadan, Sadaqatul Fitr. So Sadaqatul Fitr is mandatory wajib on every free Muslim who is legally responsible, mukallaf, possessing the nisab in excess of any debts and of basic personal needs. So it's a bit, the fiqh here obviously has a lot of conditions and things. So let's break it all down. So we have here, firstly, Sadaqatul Fitr, which is the charity given at the end of Ramadan, is mandatory wajib. So it's a wajib that every person must give. So every free Muslim, should I say, every free Muslim who is legally responsible, mukallaf, meaning a person who is addressed by Sharia, meaning that they're sane, they're adult, they're mature. So they've reached the age of maturity in essence. So this is what mukallaf is referring to, possessing the nisab, and this is the nisab of hirman. So we've discussed this in detail previously. The nisab of hirman, meaning the nisab which makes a person not able to receive zakat. So remembering, just to recap very briefly, we had the nisab of wujub, of zakat, where you possess that type of nisab, where then meaning malun nami, if you remember, and that is that potential to grow that type of money, which then obviously will be zakatable. So a person will have to pay zakat. That's the wujub of zakat. The same threshold, and the amount is the same for nisab of hirman, but the things you count in that nisab is going to be different. So you count anything which is beyond your necessity. So if a person has a lot of, pairs of clothing, for example, he has so many clothing, there's no justified reason as to why he got so many clothing. So the clothing that would fall under your need, those you can count within your need. Anything beyond your need, anything which is just luxury, you just got it because it looked nice and you bought it and the rest of it, right? You don't wear it much. That's beyond need. So that will now count at its current value in this nisab. So you count that, you count this, you count that, you count the extra shoes that you have, you count the extra whatever else you have. Yeah, you got an extra phone that you don't need, but it's there. That extra phone, you count that in the nisab. But the nisab of hirman. So you count all of those extra things that you have, which you could have sold, but you didn't sell. So you got all those things, now you have the nisab of hirman. So if you've got the nisab of hirman, then you have to do this, you have to give the sadaqatul fitr. In excess of, so he says in excess of any debt, obviously because debts, and of basic personal needs, because debts, you can say, it's counted within the person's basic needs anyway. Essential needs is to pay off the debt. So if in any excess of any basic needs, personal needs, essential needs, this is going to be this nisab that we're talking about, the nisab of hirman. So if a person has this nisab of hirman, they have to give sadaqatul fitr. That's that. So you can understand why that is. Just the logical concept of why that is because a person has, the idea is that this person has anything beyond their basic needs. They have things beyond their basic needs. So then they should be supporting the whole concept, remember, of sadaqatul fitr is to give to the poor, those people who will not be able to support themselves on this day and enjoy the day of Eid. So we're giving to these people, right? If you're giving to these people, then you should be giving them if you have anything beyond your need. So that's the reason of nisab hirman being considered. You have things beyond your need. That means you should be giving to these people who don't have anything, even that things that they need. So these are the people you should be giving, so that you're not amassing things beyond your need, and then you're not supporting those people who don't have even the basic needs. So you can understand the concept as why nisab of hirman is considered. So like that, you will not get confused, hopefully, if you understand the reasoning as to why. Moving on, it is mandatory on behalf of oneself, one's children who is a minor, one's child who is a minor. So you have to give on behalf of your children who are minor. So this obviously means that if they are mature, if they've reached the age of puberty, then it's not due on the father to pay on behalf of the children who are above the age of maturity. Likewise, if the father is not alive, then the grandfather then takes the responsibility of paying on behalf of the grandchild. So it's because the grandfather takes on the position of a father when the father is not alive. So this is as far as it goes. The father or the grandfather will have to pay on behalf of the son or the grandson. Now, this is different to the udhiyah. That's where the udhiyah differs from sadaqatul fitr. The similarity between sadaqatul fitr and udhiyah is that they're both nisab of hirman. The consideration is in both of them of nisab of hirman. If you have nisab of hirman, both of them will come necessary on you. But the difference between them is that when the father is paying on behalf of sadaqatul fitr on behalf of the children, grandfather also has to pay. But when it comes to the ritual sacrifice, then that does not have to be performed by by the parent on behalf of the poor child. Okay, so that's the difference, that you do not need to pay on behalf of the child. Yeah, so the father doesn't have to pay, grandfather doesn't have to pay. So that's the difference here. So we've done this before when we talked about the udhiyah. Then likewise, the father, if this minor child, so we're talking about on behalf of one's minor child, but if the minor child has wealth of their own, then the father can take the money for Sadaqatul Fitr from the child's wealth. So the obligation actually is on the child's wealth. But if the father pays on behalf of the child without taking from the child's wealth, or any other parent, any guardian, anyone pays on behalf of anybody, that's fine, absolutely fine. Here, the difference here is in comparison to zakat. In zakat, when you pay on behalf of somebody, they have to make intention, because remember, zakat, you have to have intention. But in Sadaqatul Fitr, you don't have to have, the person doesn't have to have intention as long as they are dependents. Because Sadaqatul Fitr is due on you for yourself and for your dependents. Whereas zakat is not due on you for yourself and it's due on you, but not on you for your dependents. They have to pay for themselves, if they obviously meet the nisab. So here in Sadaqatul Fitr, the Sadaqatul Fitr is due on a person on behalf of their dependents as well. So anyone that is their dependent. So that means your child, your children, even if they're mature, or even your wife, if they are your dependents, then you can pay on their behalf. Now, once you've paid on their behalf, they don't need to pay anymore, because you've paid their part, you've paid their liability. But if you do not pay, then they are due to pay. They have to pay. If they are rich enough, if they have the wealth, then if they have the nisab, they have to pay. The only time that a father has to pay is if they've got a non-mature child, and the child doesn't have nisab of their own. Then the father has to pay on behalf of this child. So hopefully this is understood, not too complicated. So moving on in the book, it says one's slave used, so it is mandatory on behalf of oneself, one's children who are minor, also on behalf of one's slave used for personal service. So if I've got a slave that's used for my personal service, I have to pay zakah, so I have to pay Sadaqatul Fitr on behalf of this slave of mine. Likewise, one slave promised freedom upon owner's death, which we call the mudabbar. So if I had a slave and I promised this slave that after I die, you are free. This slave is now mudabbar. I have to pay Sadaqatul Fitr on behalf of this slave of mine. And likewise, the one's female slave with whom he bore a child, which we call an walad. So if there was a master who had a child with their slave girl, then this slave girl, after bearing a child from the master, becomes an walad, meaning the mother of the child of the master, in essence. So this slave will be automatically freed once the master passes away, just like the mudabbar will be. So just like the mudabbar, the master will pay on behalf of this slave girl too, the Sadaqatul Fitr. So even if the slave is non-Muslim, so if the slaves are non-Muslim, still you have to pay on behalf of them, because they are dependents. So that's that. And then it says it is not mandatory on behalf of one's slave working for his freedom. So meaning the mukatab slave, where the slave has got a deal with the master that if you pay me X amount of money, you will be free. So if the slave is working for their freedom, they've got their money, because they're going to have money to be able to earn, to work for their freedom, to earn enough money to pay for their freedom. So that money they've got of their own, if it reaches nisab, they're going to pay for themselves. So that is that. So a slave working for his freedom. One's child, obviously, if the slave doesn't have enough money to pay for their freedom, because the amount that they owe for their freedom, they're going to be indebted to that, right? So anyway, these are slave masail. We don't have to spend too long on this. Hopefully everyone understands all these masail. But moving on, it says one's child, son or daughter, who is an adult. So the father, like I explained previously, does not have to pay on behalf of the son or daughter who is mature now. Likewise, one's wife, you don't have to pay on behalf of the wife. Like I explained previously, but because they have to pay on behalf of themselves if they reach the nisab. If they don't have nisab, then they don't give anything. I mean, the husband can still choose to give, that's up to him. in either scenario, whether they have nisab or not, no, who don't have nisab, they can, that's the father can, I mean the husband or the father, he can pay. Moving on, a co-owned slave. So obviously if you have a slave with somebody else, so if I have a slave 50-50 with yourself, me and you, we own a slave 50-50, then neither of us have to pay sadaqatul fitr on behalf of this slave, because neither of us own that slave fully. So we don't have a full slave. So that why do I have to pay sadaqatul fitr? Or a runaway slave. Likewise, the runaway slave, kidnapped slave, or imprisoned slave. Any of these, except after their return. So if they return, once they return, I have to pay for all those years that were missed, sadaqatul fitr for. Now moving on, the amount due, how much sadaqatul fitr is due. So the amount due is a half sa', which it mentions to be 2.2 kg of wheat, flour, or sawiq, which is a mixture of wheat and barley. So any of these, because generally in this mixture there will be more wheat than barley, so we consider this to be in essence wheat, because the dominant is the one that's going to take the ruling. So it will be half a sa' of these wheat, flour in essence. Or it'll be 1 sa', meaning double the amount, 4.4 kg of dates, raisins, or barley, which equals 8 ritls according to the Iraqi standard. So this is according to the Iraqi measure. He has mentioned 8 ritl because that's obviously what was used in their time. But obviously nowadays we can see that it's equating to 2.2 for us, 2.2 kg for half a sa' and 4.4 kg for full sa'. Now this is obviously a higher amount. There is a lot of difference of opinion in regards to the value of sadaqatul fitr, you would say. So there are varying opinions. You will find online varying opinions in regards to how much the zakatul fitr is. The idea of this is, look, firstly understand, because this is a question that comes up a lot for many people, that how come there's so many different charities, so many different masajid, so many masjids that are actually mentioning different amounts of sadaqatul fitr? Why have everybody got different amounts? So understand that the amount of sadaqatul fitr firstly is either in accordance to any of these items that we just said, wheat, barley, raisins, dates. So obviously the prices for each one differs. Likewise, the weights, the density of each one differs. So half a sa' of wheat won't weigh the same amount as a full sa' of barley, or a full sa' of raisins, or a full sa' of raisins will not weigh the same amount as a full sa' of dates, for example, right? There's going to be a difference. Likewise, when you have the difference in weight, you also will have the difference in their prices. Okay, even if it's a 1 sa', it will still have difference in prices. So the prices will be different. So if people have, chosen, and then on top of that, when you convert from sa' to kg, because remember sa' is a volumetric measure, and the kg that we're converting into obviously is weight based. So we're converting from volume to weight. So there's going to be a difference of opinion amongst this. Like everyone does the experiment and tries to measure half a sa'. Firstly, the sa' in itself, there is a difference of opinion regarding how much is a sa'. All right, that even if we come to a conclusion, when you do the experiment of transferring, let's say we try to measure how we will get wheat, and then we will measure half a sa' of wheat. Somebody else will take wheat in a different country, and their wheat grain will be different, perhaps the density of that will be different. They will measure half a sa' and their weight will be slightly different. So there's always going to be discrepancies like this, measurement differences like this. So it's not a big problem. It's not a big problem. I mean, the lowest I've seen in terms of opinions of the scholars, which are reliable, are relied upon opinions, you can even say, though people have mentioned, is 1.1 1.106 kg is half a sa' of wheat. This is mentioned by Ma Abdul Hayy Laknawi, based on, there's also Ma Khalid Saifullah, who's written in his Kitabul Fatawa, volume 3, page 362 for those people who want to know. There's many others, Mufti Aziz Rahman, and in his Darul Uloom, Fatawa Darul Uloom, and there's many, like I said to you, many others have mentioned this type of weight. I mean, there are other opinions, definitely, like another opinion is 1.575 kg is half a sa', and this is mentioned by Mufti Abdul Rahim Lajpuri, who passed away in the year 2001, a prominent Mufti in the Indian subcontinent. Then you have 1.59 kg is half a sa' of wheat, which is mentioned by Mufti Shafi Uthmani, passed away in 1976 in his Kitab al-Fatawa. Khaja Saifullah mentions about this as well. Then you've got another opinion, 1.625 kg is half a sa' of wheat, which is mentioned by a Syrian scholar, Sheikh Asad Muhammad Sa'id. So he passed away in the year 2015. So he mentions this as well. Then you've got 1.633. 1.633 is a figure which a lot of people have gone for, being half a sa' of wheat, being the view of Mufti Mahmud al-Hasan Gangohi, who passed away in 1996. In his Fatawa Mahmudiyah, he's written about this, and some other contemporary scholars have gone for this. Then you've got 1.75 kg being half a sa' of wheat. That's another opinion, and this is attributed again to Mufti Abdul Rahim Lajpuri. Mufti Rada al-Haq mentions regarding this in Fatawa Darum Zakaria. And you've got lastly 1.866 kg is half a sa' of wheat, and this is mentioned by Maulana Mufti Zafar Ahmad Uthmani, passed away in 1974, and he's mentioned this in Imdadul Ahkam. So you can see there's various opinions. Mufti Rashid Ahmad Budhianvi actually mentioned 2.32, which is probably the highest, 2.32. And he does mention in his Ahsan al-Fatawa that 2.25, in fact, is also correct to give. It's fine to give, because obviously, like I said, they can fluctuate a little bit, right? So that's probably the one that the book is going with, the more precautionary opinion, which Mufti Rashid Ahmad mentioned, who passed away in the year 2002. So you see, there's scholars who have conducted their own experiments, in essence, and they measured that according to the sa', and they came up to these kind of figures. So then you convert that, once you got that, how much kg is worth, you convert that into how much that half a sa', or how much that wheat would cost. So if you're going with 2.2 kg, you find how much 2.2 kg of wheat would cost, and then you know how much the Sadaqatul Fitr actually is due on you to be. So this is what generally you can try to work out, and you will see the charities are a little bit higher than that, so it's fine, no problem. If a person is obviously struggling, they can go with the lower figure, no problem. If a person's well off and they can give the higher amount, then it's always better to give the higher amount, especially when we consider that you want to try to give to a poor person the amount that would fulfill the need of their day in terms of food wise. So these are things that we can take into consideration. Hopefully people understand this. So the point simply is, bottom line, if it's confusing, bottom line simply is that this is not a point to squabble over and cause a big hoo-ha over, you can say, and a difference of opinion. It's fine. Some people have mentioned this amount, some people have mentioned that amount, no problem. You go according to those people you trust and rely on, and you take that much amount for yourself. It's fine. Moving on, it is permissible to pay by monetary value of one of the above amounts. That's generally what people do. You don't actually give that half a sa' of wheat to the poor person, you actually equate it to the monetary value and give it. So that's fine. It's saying it's permissible to do this. In fact, it's going to mention now what's better to do. So it says this is actually superior when one can find what he needs, i.e. in times of ease, when it's not times of drought. when it's times of just general normal ease, people are in normal ease, right? So then the poor person, to give them the money equivalent, the monetary value of this is better. Why? Because then they can buy whatever they want from it. They can buy wheat if they wanted to. They could buy something else if they wanted to, because they got the money. As it is more expedient in fulfilling the need of the indigent, so like I explained, it fulfills the need of the poor person better. If, however, it is the time of difficulty, like famine, or if there's a famine, there's a drought or something like that, yeah, then wheat, barley, or any staple food is, sort of staple goods, is better, is superior to monetary currency. So rather than give money to them, because what are they going to do with the money? There's no food in the market. So getting them the food, the wheat, the barley, and whatever else, is going to be better than giving them the money. So that's how we consider what is superior to give. Then the time in which Sadaqatul Fitr becomes mandatory. So when does Sadaqatul Fitr become actually mandatory? Exactly when? Is when Fajr comes in on the day of Eid al-Fitr. So on the 1st of Shawwal, when the Eid al-Fitr happens, at exactly Fajr time. So if, for argument's sake, Fajr was at, 4:01. Okay, so now at 4:01, exactly then is when the wujub will come in. So what this means, what this entails, therefore, if one dies or becomes indigent before the time, so before that time, then there will be no Sadaqatul Fitr on that person. So if a person died any time before 4:01, if they died at 3:30 a.m., only like half an hour before, but they passed away, there is no Sadaqatul Fitr on that person. Okay, likewise, if a person was rich, had nisab, but became now poor below the nisab before that Subh Sadiq, before the time of true dawn, when Fajr time starts, then they will not need to give Sadaqatul Fitr. So that's that. Or, moving on in the book, or if one becomes Muslim or attains wealth thereby, possessing nisab, or is born after that time, then it will not be mandatory for him. So if a person becomes Muslim after Subh Sadiq, so in Fajr time, after 4:01, anytime, 4:30, 5 o'clock, anytime, 6 o'clock or 10 a.m. or anytime, after the time of that Subh Sadiq, they became Muslim, then there is no Sadaqatul Fitr on them. Why? Because they didn't go past that point. They didn't reach that point when it was Subh Sadiq. That's the time when Shariat announced them to give Sadaqatul Fitr. But they were not mukallaf, they were not mukhatab, in essence, they were not addressed at that time by Sharia. They became Muslim after that. Likewise, all these other things, if a person possesses the nisab after that, or if a person is born, if there's a child that's born after that point, there is no Sadaqatul Fitr. If the child was born before then, and obviously stayed alive, child was born, let's say 3:45, and obviously the child stayed alive after that. When the time of Fajr came in, the child was alive, the father will have to now pay on behalf of this child. So this is when exactly the Sadaqatul Fitr, wujub, the mandate actually comes onto a person. Next, moving on, it is preferable to pay before leaving for the Eid prayer area, the musalla, yet it is valid if one pays it beforehand or afterwards, although delaying it is disliked. So, as we mentioned previously as well, that Sadaqatul Fitr is given before, generally before leaving. It says here, leaving for the Eid prayer. That's because they understood that there would be poor people in your area, and you will be able to give them Sadaqatul Fitr. So that's the reason they mentioned before the Eid prayer, or on the way to the Musalla, you pay, before you enter the Eid Musalla, you want to, where the Eid is going to be, prayed, you want to give the Sadaqatul Fitr to people. So that's the best thing, to give it beforehand. It doesn't mean just beforehand, anytime beforehand. Okay, it can be given anytime beforehand to reach the poor people before the day of Eid, so they can enjoy the day of Eid. That's the point. Now, if a person missed it and did not give it before then, it doesn't mean that they don't give it anymore. They still have to give it. Okay? So this is until the end of one's life. If a person hasn't given it yet, they will still give it for the previous years, whenever they missed it. But like I said, it's mildly disliked to have delayed it this much. They should have given it before the Eid day. lastly, finishing off here, every person should pay it to one indigent person, meaning a faqir, even if to a non-Muslim resident of Muslim lands, a dhimmi. So meaning one person, if I'm giving my sadaqatul fitr, I give my sadaqatul fitr to one person. I shouldn't split it. I shouldn't give half to him and half to him. I should give to one. So one person gives to one person. The reason is because my sadaqatul fitr I'm giving is going to be enough for one person to spend their day nicely. So rather than give them half, I give them the full amount. And even if I'm giving to a non-Muslim who lives in Muslim lands, who lives in the Muslim state, Muslim dhimmi lands, so they become a dhimmi, in Muslim Darul Islam, they live there with visa, so they are called a dhimmi, they're resident there. So this person you can give to as well. Obviously it would be optimal to give to a Muslim, but you can also give to these people if you can't find anybody else. Says one may not split it between two indigent persons, like I already explained, faqirs, although there is a disagreement among the jurists on this matter, meaning whether you can split it between two people or not. So it's always optimal, the best thing to give it to one person gives to one person. Now, it is permissible for a group of people to pay their combined sadaqatul fitr to one recipient according to the soundest position, the sahih opinion in the madhab. So meaning, if a group of us got together, we collected our sadaqatul fitr and then we gave that pot now to one person, that's fine. That's also fine to do according to the sound opinion here. Now, lastly, finishing off, a question that could come up, because obviously this is not a question that's covered here, but I will cover this, that can a person give sadaqatul fitr, meaning when you give your sadaqatul fitr, what value will you take into consideration? Is it the local value if you're giving it abroad? So you're giving your sadaqatul fitr somewhere else abroad in a different country. So when you're giving it abroad, do you give according to their rate, the recipient's rate, where they're going to receive it, or do you give according to the giver's rate, the sadaqatul fitr according to our rate? So that's the question here. So there are both opinions here of scholars. Okay, so the latest scholars, because this is not a discussion which the earliest scholars had, because like we understood they were giving it when they're on their way to before they go to the musalla, because they had poor people in their areas. They never envisaged that somebody would be giving their sadaqatul fitr abroad, which we generally do in the West nowadays. So for us, there are two opinions mentioned. Both opinions are fine. You can go with the recipients or you can go with the givers. Generally, we give fatwa that whatever is more beneficial for the recipient, then give that. So if by going with your rate, the recipient receives a higher amount, then go according to your rate. If by going with their rate, the recipient receives a higher amount, then go according to their rate. So it's the thing that is more beneficial for that poor person, do that. That would be the optimal thing to do. But there are opinions, like I said, on both sides, so it's no problem if somebody follows a different opinion as well. It's all fine. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So now just to summarize what we've done today. So we talked about zakat on pensions. So we broke down pension into two types really. The defined benefit, defined contribution. Defined benefit is not zakatable. Defined contribution is zakatable, the amount of zakatable funds that there are in the actual pension pot. Then we went on to the chapter of Sadaqatul Fitr, talking about firstly it being mandatory wajib on a person who's mukallaf and they possess the nisab, meaning the nisab of hirman. Then it being also mandatory to pay on behalf of one's dependents, the minor children who are not, who don't possess their own wealth, meaning they don't have a nisab themselves. Then it's mandatory for the father to, in essence, pay on their behalf, or the grandfather if the father is not alive. Then we also said regarding being allowed to be paid on behalf of other dependents too, even if they didn't have an intention, because generally a dependent would know that I'm being paid for, even if they didn't know, it would be fine, because you're paying on behalf of dependents. But you don't need to pay, it's not mandatory to pay on behalf of those adult children as well as one's wife. If they own their own nisab, they will pay from their own money. If they don't own nisab, the nisab of hirman, then there will not be any necessity on them anyway. Then we went on to explaining regarding the actual amount, which is half a sa' of wheat or full sa' of dates, raisins, barley, and equaling to 2.2 kg and 4.4 kg respectively. Then the allowance, it's allowed to give the monetary value of these items that we just mentioned, and when that would be actually better to give. On a general state, it would be better to give the money. Then the actual wujub comes in of sadaqatul fitr at the time of Fajr beginning time. So that's when the wujub will come in on a person. So if they're alive at that time, it will be necessary for them, it will become necessary upon them. So if they pass away after that, it would also already have been necessary upon them to have paid their sadaqatul fitr. So somebody's going to have to pay. If they haven't instructed somebody, they should have instructed somebody. Anyway, now then we talked about it's better to give the sadaqatul fitr before leaving for the Eid prayer. So the idea is so that it gets to the poor beforehand. So generally many people would have collected this sadaqatul fitr during Ramadan or even in the beginning of Ramadan, and they would have sent it over to somewhere else to be able to give off to the poor people. So that's the way. I mean, if a person doesn't do that, then afterwards they should be giving anyway. If a person's got many years left to pay for, they should be giving. And then we talked about lastly about one person giving to one person, not distributing it. That's the best thing to do. And a group of people can also give it to one person after collecting their sadaqatul fitr together. So these are the rulings we covered. We also covered one more ruling, that you go according to what's better in terms of rate for the person you're giving your sadaqatul fitr to. So if you're sending your sadaqatul fitr abroad somewhere, if it's more beneficial for them to receive according to their rate, because they'll get a higher amount, then you give according to their rate. And if it's better for them to receive, if it's a higher amount by considering your rate, the rate that according to your country, then that would obviously be better to give. So these are the rulings, drawing us to the end of this particular seminar, or this semester. I hope everybody's enjoyed this semester. Allah bless you all, grant you the best of this knowledge, and insha'Allah, Allah Ta'ala accept from all of us and make it a means of His pleasure. Ameen Ya Rabbal Alameen.